If you value your sleep, don't book this place. And if you ever find yourself driving through the dense forests of Hinsdale, New York, watch closely as the environment changes. Watch as the cell service disappears. Watch as the trees seem to close in, narrowing the road, blocking out the sun until noon feels like twilight. But mostly, pay attention to the silence. Because some houses are haunted by what happened inside them, a crime, a tragedy, a moment of violence, frozen in time. Others are haunted by what the land refuses to forget. The Hinsdale House is not known for a single gruesome murder. There is no serial killer in its history. It is known because every family who lived here described the same fear across different decades without ever knowing each other. People didn't leave this house because they saw ghosts floating in the hallway. They left because the house slowly changed how they felt, how they slept, and eventually how they behaved. It dismantled them from the inside out. Tonight, we are not just listing paranormal activity. We are uncovering the history, the land, and the terrifying pattern that turned this ordinary white farmhouse into one of the most feared locations in the United States. If you appreciate horror stories that explain the fear instead of just showing it, like the video and subscribe. This channel doesn't rush the nightmare. It lets it grow. And as Spline, Chapter 1, before the house existed. Long before the Hinsdale House was built, before a single wooden beam was raised, the land itself carried a heavy reputation. Historical records and local oral history suggest this area was used by Native American tribes for a very specific purpose. It wasn't a village. It wasn't a settlement. It was a seasonal hunting ground, yes. But it also served as a quarantine zone. It was a place to isolate the sick, the dying, and those believed to be spiritually dangerous to the rest of the group. Elders warned that certain sections of this forest were to be avoided after sunset, not because of animals, but because hunters reported disorientation, sudden fear, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched by something that left no tracks. When European settlers arrived in the early 1800s, they ignored these warnings. Several small cabins were built on or near the property lines. Most were abandoned quickly. Some burned down under unexplained circumstances, fires that started without lightning or spilled hearths. By the time the Hinsdale House was constructed in the mid-1800s, locals already considered the land disturbed. The house did not create the problem. It settled on top of a wound that had never healed. Chapter 2, The First Families. The earliest documented residents didn't report dramatic hauntings. There were no flying objects at first. Instead, they described something more subtle and more dangerous. It began with persistent insomnia, a sense of pressure in the air, heavy like the atmosphere before a storm, but it never broke. Residents reported hearing heavy footsteps pacing on the floorboards above them. The terrifying part? In the original structure, the rooms where they heard walking had no upper floor. They were listening to footsteps on air. Diaries from the late 1800s mention repeated nightmares shared by different family members. Often, they involved the same imagery: dark figures standing near the bed, watching silently. But the most distinct sign came from the animals. Dogs would bark aggressively at empty hallways or refuse to enter the house entirely, cowering in the yard. Horses became violently agitated near the property line, requiring owners to move them miles away just to calm them down. No family stayed long. What's important is the pattern. The house didn't attack immediately. It observed. It waited until they were comfortable. Chapter 3, when the activity turned intentional. By the mid-1900s, the activity shifted. It stopped being passive and became aggressive. Doors didn't just drift open. They slammed violently, with enough force to shake the walls. Objects moved without explanation, sometimes thrown across the room. Voices were no longer just murmurs. They whispered names. They started responding when spoken to. Former residents described the activity as intelligent and selective. It happened most often when someone was alone. It intensified during emotional stress, arguments, or exhaustion. Investigators later noted something chilling. The house seemed to react to people, not to rooms. If a family member was vulnerable, the activity followed them. One specific phenomenon reported during this era was the sound of chanting. Residents described hearing low, rhythmic, Gregorian-style humming coming from the woods or vibrating within the walls themselves. This marked a crucial shift. The Hinsdale House was no longer just uncomfortable. It was interactive. It was playing with them. Chapter 4. The Doppelganger Phenomenon. One of the most documented and disturbing phenomena at the Hinsdale House is the appearance of doppelgangers. Visitors would report seeing family members standing silently in doorways, looking out windows, or sitting in chairs. They would speak to them, get no response, and moments later realize the actual person was in the barn, upstairs, or completely off the property. Folklore associates doppelgangers with locations where psychological boundaries weaken, places that disorient identity and perception. It is a mimicry designed to confuse. In Hinsdale, these sightings were never harmless. They almost always preceded an escalation. Scratches, violent nightmares, or emotional breakdowns. The house doesn't scare people immediately. It isolates them first. It makes them question their own eyes, breaking down their trust in reality before the real terror begins. Chapter 5. Sleep deprivation and physical marks. Fear is mental, but at Hinsdale, the haunting became physical. Nearly every resident reported severe sleep disruption. People woke at the same times each night, often around 3 a.m. Nightmares became shared experiences. Sleep paralysis was common, with residents describing the sensation of heavy hands pinning them to the mattress. But the evidence remained after they woke up. Unexplained scratches often appeared on their bodies. Sometimes these marks appeared after a night of terror. Other times, they appeared while people were fully awake, 3 distinct red welts forming on the skin as if carved by an invisible claw. Researchers believe exhaustion lowers psychological defenses, making targets easier to manipulate. But hallucinations don't leave physical scars. That's where history ends and fear begins. Chapter 6. Why People Run. The final stage is always the same. It is an oppressive dread, a sense of being watched constantly from every shadow. The feeling that the house is aware of you. Families don't move out of the Hinsdale House slowly. They don't pack boxes over weeks. They flee. There are stories of families leaving in the middle of the night, abandoning furniture, clothes, and heirlooms, driving away with only what they could carry. They don't say goodbye. They escape. Closing. The Hinsdale House is not haunted by one spirit. It is haunted by continuity, different families, different decades, same reactions. The land remembers the isolation from centuries ago, and it repeats that cycle on anyone who tries to live there. If you ever visit Hinsdale, New York, don't trust familiar faces in the window. Don't ignore the silence, And don't assume a house is only as old as its walls. If you value your sleep, don't book this place.